The evening sky was turning a dim shade of gold as the city lights quietly awakened one by one. Inside a small apartment on the 6th floor, a calm silence floated in the air, the sort of silence that did not feel peaceful at all, but rather heavy, like an unspoken confession that had been drifting in the same room for several months. Aisha sat near the window, her fingers resting lightly on the cool glass, her eyes following the distant movements of the world outside. Cars rushed through the road, birds slipped into their nests, and the wind brushed softly against the curtains. Yet inside her chest, everything felt painfully still. Her partner, Hamza, sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, unaware of the emptiness that had begun shaping itself around her. There was a time when his slightest touch could melt the heaviest of her worries, when his presence could turn ordinary evenings into memories worth saving. Tonight, however, she felt like a visitor in her own life, a stranger standing in a place she once called home. A soft ache traveled through her when she saw the reflection of her own face in the window. Her eyes looked tired in a way that sleep could not cure. Her lips had forgotten how to curve into an unforced smile. There was a quiet trembling beneath her calm posture, the kind of trembling that only grows when a heart tries too hard to appear strong. Hamza eventually looked up from his phone, but not at her, just around the room as if searching for something. She watched him for a moment with a longing she could not name. She wanted him to notice the heaviness in her breathing, the sadness hiding in her gaze, the exhaustion resting upon her shoulders. But he simply adjusted his chair and returned to his screen, unaware that her heart was slowly slipping away. Eliza drew her fingers back from the window and allowed her hand to fall to her side. A small whisper formed inside her chest, a whisper that could have changed everything if she had dared to speak it out loud. "Please notice me before I disappear completely." But she said nothing. She simply walked past Hamza, her footsteps soft, her presence even softer. And in that moment, the air around her carried the quiet truth of her emotional exhaustion, a truth she had been living with, but could no longer hide from herself. The morning sun entered Aisha's room softly, spilling gentle streaks of light across the walls, yet the warmth of the day could not touch the heaviness resting in her chest. She stood before the bathroom mirror, her reflection staring back at her with familiar features, but the spark that had once lived in her eyes was absent. Her lips moved, attempting a small smile, yet it remained hollow, a shadow of the joy she had once carried so effortlessly. She ran her fingers through her hair, pushing it gently behind her ears, and paused, noticing the faint lines of exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. She had tried to hide them for so long, attempting to convince herself and everyone around her that everything was fine. But in the mirror, there was no convincing herself anymore. Aisha walked slowly to the kitchen, each step deliberate, almost reluctant, as if her body were moving through a dream she did not fully inhabit. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat down at the small dining table, feeling the warmth of the cup seep into her fingers, though the comfort it offered barely touched her heart. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced down at a message from Hamza. "I hope you slept well. I will be busy most of the day." Her lips pressed together. She did not smile. She did not reply. She simply let the message sit there, unread, untouched, almost as if acknowledging it would require an effort her heart could not spare. There had been a time when she would have responded immediately, pouring warmth and care into each word, even when her day had been heavy. But now even small gestures felt impossible. Her heart had become quiet, almost paralyzed, retreating from the world it had once embraced so fully. She took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes drifting toward the chair across the table. That chair had once been the center of conversation, of shared laughter, of dreams whispered in soft voices. Today, it felt like a reminder of distance, of a connection fading slowly, silently, without accusation, without conflict. Just absence. A soft sigh escaped her lips, the kind of sigh that carries weight without sound. It was the second sign of her emotional exhaustion. Her smile no longer reached her eyes. It was there in form only, a performance she had grown accustomed to, a mask she wore to meet the world while her heart quietly retreated. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long lazy stripes of light across the living room. Aisha sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, surrounded by the belongings she once cherished. A stack of novels lay beside her, their pages worn and familiar, yet today they seemed foreign, objects she had once poured her soul into, now merely shapes in the quiet room. She picked up one of the books, holding it in her hands, and stared at the cover. There had been a time when opening it would transport her into another world, filling her with warmth, curiosity, and wonder. But now her fingers felt heavy. Her mind refused to follow the story. The excitement she had once known had vanished quietly, leaving only emptiness behind. Her gaze drifted to the small canvas leaning in the corner, unfinished. Colors swirled across half of it, vibrant and bold, speaking of the energy she had once poured into her creativity. The other half remained blank, waiting for her to return to it, but she hesitated. Her heart and mind no longer carried the courage, or perhaps the will, to finish what she had started. A soft vibration from her phone reminded her again of tasks she had set for herself. She ignored it. Her mind felt distant, disconnected from everything she once loved. Even the small joys, her books, her plants, her art, now failed to ignite the spark she had relied on to feel alive. This was the fourth sign of her emotional exhaustion. She had begun disconnecting completely from herself. The evening returned, wrapping the apartment in its familiar muted glow. Aisha sat on the edge of her bed, knees drawn close, her hands resting limply on her lap. The day had passed slowly, each hour stretching like a shadow that refused to leave. Her mind felt heavy, weighed down by invisible burdens, by emotions she could no longer articulate, and by the quiet realization that nobody had noticed how far she had drifted. She pressed her palms over her eyes, and a soft tear slid down her cheek. Another followed, and another. Each one was silent, invisible, a secret she refused to show the world. Her pain existed in her silence. Every unspoken word, every withheld sigh, every tear spoke volumes about the exhaustion she carried. She was not screaming, not demanding attention, not even asking for help. She simply was, quietly breaking, slowly fading, hoping someone might notice before it was too late. This was the fifth sign of her emotional fatigue. Her pain existed in the silence she refused to break. The first light of dawn crept gently through the curtains, painting the room in soft shades of gold. Aisha sat on the edge of her bed, still wrapped in the weight of yesterday's silence, yet something within her stirred, a faint, fragile spark that had not existed for weeks. She looked around the room at the books, the unfinished painting, the small plant by the window. Each object reminded her of pieces of herself she had neglected, fragments of joy and life she had allowed to slip away. Slowly, she rose and walked toward the painting. Her fingers hovered over the canvas, hesitant at first, then firm. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her face, and with a gentle, deliberate movement, she began to paint. The colors moved across the blank space, not with perfection, not with urgency, but with intention, proof that she was still here, still alive, still capable of feeling. Aisha paused, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, yes, but they carried a small, unspoken resilience. Her smile returned, soft, quiet, genuine. It did not need to reach anyone else. It only needed to reach herself. Being emotionally tired did not mean she was broken. It only meant she had the strength to rebuild, slowly, gently, in her own time. And with that realization, she stepped forward into the new day, carrying her heart with care, but also with courage.